Hi everyone, today we'll be talking about Lesson 8. We're going to be dealing with cells, tissues, organs, and systems. So now we're starting a new chapter, Chapter 3, and this is going to be a lot of the systems that you're familiar with from elementary school. Okay, so we'll start off small and work our way up. So initially, when we talked about cells, we know that cells can specialize because they have different functions. Just like I keep saying, an eye cell doesn't have the same function as a kidney cell or a heart cell. So much like, once again, up until grade 10, you guys didn't have a choice. But after grade 10, you get to choose the path you make. You get to specialize, just like cells. Not every cell is going to have the same function. They all have the same DNA inside of them, but as you remember from previous lessons, DNA codes for proteins, and those proteins are the things that actually do stuff. So the proteins that are activated or turned on tell us what the function of that cell is going to be. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about cell specialization. Our cells develop into cells that can do specific things. Okay, so how do cells specialize? Well, they go through a little process called cell differentiation. Okay, so they go from being a cell that can be anything to a cell that has a specific function. All right, last lesson with plants. The cells that could be anything in a plant was called a meristematic cell. In animals, which we are, by the way, those cells that are unspecialized are called stem cells. And you've probably heard that word before, or those words. It's actually two words. But keep in mind, meristematic cells for plants, stem cells for animals. Okay, so once again, stem cells are cells, and they're animal cells, that have the capability of becoming anything. That's what makes them so valuable. They can be induced, and that's the word, they can be induced or made to become a bunch of different types of cells. Okay, so here is, I'm going to just scooch this up a bit. I like this picture. So here's a video. Should you desire, you can watch it and it will help you learn a little bit more about cell specialization in animal cells, okay, and in animals. But if you take a look at this diagram right here, so here's my stem cell. And remember, a stem cells in an animal cell is undifferentiated, meaning it has the capability of being any kind of cell at this point. Kind of like you in grade 10. You haven't specialized. You have the capability of choosing a totally different path. Okay? Just like, and it's not even just for grade 10. You could be in grade 12 and all of a sudden say, hey, I want to do something else. At this stage of the game, you guys are unspecialized. So a stem cell can choose to become any one of these guys around here. Okay? All right. Now, can it just choose? No, because remember I used that word induced. It has to be influenced into becoming a specific type of cell. Okay, so when we talk about influences, okay, every time I say this, I think of, my mother saying, you're always going to be around the people you hang around with because people influence your behavior. Kind of the same situation with the cell. There are three things, there we go, that influence what a cell is going to become. So number one, what is the cell surrounded by? So the contents of the cell cytoplasm, right? So sometimes some cells will have more storage vacuoles than another, and having more of those vacuoles will allow the cell to use more energy as it grows. So typically, what is in that cell cytoplasm will influence what that cell can become. All right. Example number 2. Ooh, look, there's a kitty cat. Anybody watching that tiger show on Netflix. Anyway, back to my lecture. Environmental conditions. So once again, depending on what the cell is surrounded by, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it dry? Is it moist? Is it humid? Is it, I don't know, is there nutrients around? That kind of thing. So just like humans, you adapt to your environment, your cells have to also adapt to the environment. So these things can affect cell specialization. All right, so you can take a look at the example of the cats. This cat specifically has darker extremities, and that makes sense because we know darker, I'm just having fun circling all the cat parts now. Ooh, okay. All the extremities are at the tips, they're farthest away from the core, so they tend to get colder. And as we know, black and dark colors absorb heat. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. All right, so these environmental conditions can also influence what a cell can become. All right, and not just the environment, but let's talk about the influence of neighboring cells. Okay, so how cells around that cell are behaving influence how the cell behaves. All right, if there's not a lot of food, that might dictate how a cell's going to behave. All right, so similar conditions form similar cells. That's why your parents always want to know who your friends are, because they want to know what you're being surrounded by. Okay? Moving on. The body's organization. Okay, so this is a doozy. We call this the hierarchy. So a hierarchy, you may have heard of this before in other courses, but a hierarchy is like a class system going from the bottom to the top. And in this case, the cell, I won't say that the cell is the bottom, but I will say that the cell is the smallest. Okay? And the organism at the end of it all, we are the organism, is the biggest. So we're going to take a look at this hierarchy. So just follow with me. A bunch of similar cells makes a tissue. A bunch of similar tissues makes an organ. A bunch of similar organs makes an organ system. And a bunch of organ systems make up our organism. So everything keeps going. Small, a group of small makes a bigger. Then a group of that bigger makes an even bigger. Get what I'm saying? So once again, we know what the cell is because we did that all last chapter. Then we've got a tissue, which is a bunch of similar cells that do similar things, and they make an organ. A tissue. And then those tissues that do a bunch of similar things make up an organ. Okay, so for our purposes here, let's talk about the circulatory system. So we've got cardiac muscle cells, and a bunch of those cells make up the actual muscle, and a bunch of that muscle makes up the heart, and the heart is part of the circulatory system, and the circulatory system is one system within the human organism, like the human us. Okay, so once again, if you so desire, a lovely YouTube video you can watch. So we got a bunch of different types of tissues, and I'm sure you've seen or heard of some of these. Okay, and I'll let you read through these. There's really no need for me to go through it. But there's 4 that we're mainly going to be talking about, and here are the pictures. So epithelial, right here. Then muscle, right here, and you can see what they look like. Nervous, they've got all of these little stringed appendages there. Okay, nervous, and lastly, connective tissue. So this is right out of your textbook, and you can see the tissue as a whole and some types and what they look like. I'll let you read through that yourself. You don't really need me to go through it. But with the muscle tissue, you can have muscle tissue that you can control. So voluntary, you have choice. And you have muscle tissue that you cannot control. Like, for instance, your heart beating. You don't have control over that, okay? You can't control whether your heart beats or not. So those are examples of that. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Connective tissue is made up of bone, fat, and blood. I know a lot of people don't think of blood as being a type of tissue, but it is because it connects things, right? Blood actually connects your circulatory system with your respiratory system. All right? So blood is considered to be a connective tissue. And lastly, nervous tissue. Okay. Nervous tissue is found in your nerves. It's found in your brain. It has these long projections, okay, that impulses can go through, so your thought process to your actual end result. Things like that. Okay. So those are the four main types of tissue in the body. So we've got cells, and a group of cells make tissue. Tissue and a group of tissues make an organ. All right, so we've got 11 organ systems in the human body. Let's see, let's just squiggle underneath here. 11 organ systems. All right, and all of those are found in this picture. Okay. Here are the three we're going to be talking, and it's already lovingly boxed for us. We're going to be talking about the circulatory system, the digestive system, and the respiratory system in detail in grade 10. Okay, once you move on to grade 11 bio, you're going to be going into other systems in more depth. But for our purposes, it's these three that we're going to be dealing with. All right. So now, before we go beyond that, let's talk about stem cells. And I know you have an assignment on genetic technology, and our stem cells are an important thing in genetic technology. Let's take a look at what these mean. So when we talk about our embryos, so egg and sperm, so we've got our fertilized egg right here. So egg and sperm already met. Then we've got mitosis happening. Okay. So we've got cell division, and all of what an early embryo is when cell division has just started happening. And you've got identical, just like several identical cells. So it's within the first 24 hours after the fertilization of the egg. Okay. At this stage of the game, we are dealing with something called totipotent stem cells. These cells right here have the potential to be any kind of cell. Okay, so we can induce these cells to be anything. By day 5, do you see how persnickety this is? By day 5, there are cells that aren't just totipotent. We've already got some that have lost a few abilities. Now these ones right here, these orangey ones, those are called our pluripotent stem cells. They can still be induced to produce a lot of types of cells, but not all kinds of cells. So as you can see, the green ones, the totipotent stem cells, are a lot more valuable because they can become anything. Okay? So after, many days, then the embryo turns into a fetus, and then it's on its way to being a baby in due time, 9 to 10 months. Okay? So then once we are born, and even after a certain point, after within the development of the mother, the baby's cells can only make adult stem cells. And at this stage of the game, you're limited to the types of cells that these stem cells can make. There's not as many options. Okay? So when we talk about embryonic stem cells, when we're talking about embryonic stem cells, we're pretty much talking about this situation where they can be any kind of cell. Okay? And they're mitopotent stem cell that can keep dividing for up to a year without ever differentiating under laboratory conditions. So this is very valuable to scientists. They've been doing a lot of research with these embryonic stem cells for regenerative medicine. So people who have damaged cells, tissues, or organs, they can use these embryonic stem cells to once again grow new tissues or organs. Okay? However, there is an ethical slant to this and an ethical situation that you've always got to continue or to contemplate, not continue. You've got to look at where those embryonic stem cells are coming from, because ultimately the way the labs get those embryonic stem cells is they use embryos from fertility clinics that were not used to help women have a child. Okay, so ultimately these embryos could have been a living thing, and instead we harvest them for their stem cells, ultimately killing that embryo. Okay, so there is an ethical dilemma when it comes to using these embryonic stem cells. Here's a diagram of how embryonic stem cells are made. I'm not really interested in having you know this, so this is just for interest's sake here. Okay, and when we take a look at this Venn diagram, this compares and contrasts an adult stem cell that we can find in our bodies right now, so usually in the bone marrow, so this can be found in bone marrow, or in some cases the umbilical cord. Okay. Embryonic stem cells can only be harvested from embryos. Oops, sorry, that's messy, but okay. I've already brought up the ethical issues from using fertilized embryos, because now what we can do is we can use induced pluripotent cells, okay, from the adult stem cells. Okay, so this is now a more ethical way of using stem cells. And the cool thing about these induced pluripotent stem cells that we get from our adult stem cells, so for instance from the bone marrow, for if you happen to save your umbilical cord, they're actually finding, this is kind of cool too, they're actually finding ways that as soon as you lose a tooth, so say the tooth fairy is coming to visit you guys, well, you're beyond that point, but you can say it to your younger brothers or sisters, if you harvest that tooth right away and then store it properly, they can actually get some stem cells out of your baby teeth, as long as they're like, it's not like it, you know, my family, my mom used to have a drawer of teeth. We found it one day and we were traumatized, but those wouldn't be good. However, if you harvest it right away, you can use your baby teeth as a source of adult stem cells. Kind of cool. So here's another awesome video. And if this stuff interests you, you want to take grade 11 biology. Okay, this is I love this stuff. So this is the kind of stuff that interests you. You should take grade 11 biology. Here are some practice questions. Okay, so here are some practice questions that you should be answering. There is an LMS quiz. I want you guys to always remember to do those quizzes. You've got 3 shots. There's no due date, but these are good ways for us to assess you and to make sure you're on your game for bio. Okay, I need you to make an attempt for every quiz. Okay, like usual, if there are any things that you guys need to ask us, please go to the discussion Dropbox, ask us questions, email us. Don't be afraid to ask, because, you know, we're not scary. We want to help you. We miss you, and I can't wait to see you guys. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. All right, cool cats and kittens. We'll see you or hear from you or video you really soon.